All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children. Men will die for their wives and children. And God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts: the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendis est. Say My Pronouns. Tyrannical satanic inversion violence against logic, rhetoric, and grammar. Written by Conrad Riker. Available now. Links in description. Say My Pronouns. A field guide for men who still notice reality. The tachycardia of the tyrant. How a 147 BPM tantrum proves female emotional incontinence is a Marxist extortion racket masquerading as a moral praxis. A woman sits perfectly still in an air-conditioned room, safely ensconced in a taxpayer-funded institution built entirely by men, surrounded by the miracles of Western medicine, engineering, and constitutional order, and her heart rate spikes to 147 beats per minute because a colleague called her proposal a bit much. She wears a biometric surveillance device on her own wrist voluntarily and calls the data it produces testimony. She publishes this confession to the internet as evidence not of her own psychological disintegration, but of your guilt, and an entire academic industrial complex nods along and hands her another degree. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Really sit with it, a human being in perfect physical safety experiences, a full autonomic meltdown because someone was insufficiently enthusiastic about her PowerPoint, and she has managed to convince herself and thousands of others that this is your fault, not hers, not her nervous systems, not her endocrine systems, yours. You, the man who built the building she sits in, who laid the pipes, who wired the electricity, who fought the wars that kept the barbarians from the gates, so that gender studies departments could one day exist. You are the villain in her story, and she has the Fitbit data to prove it. The Greeks had a word for this condition, and it was not resistance. It was akrasia, the weakness of will, the state wherein the passions overthrow the rational soul and command the body, like a mutinous crew seizing a ship. The heart rate of 147 is not evidence of oppression. It is evidence that a mind has entirely lost governance of its own vessel. But we are no longer permitted to say this. We are no longer permitted to observe that a woman who cannot regulate her own physiology in a faculty meeting has no business restructuring anything, let alone an entire department, let alone an entire civilization. To state this obvious, empirical, medically sound observation is now itself classified as violence. The madwoman has seized the asylum's megaphone, and she is using it to diagnose you. Consider what she actually wrote, stripped of its academic varnish. She is not interested in being heard. She is interested in being obeyed. There it is. The entire feminist project in 9 words, no dialectic, no syllogism. No appeal to shared reason or mutual benefit. Just the raw, naked demand for submission to an unfalsifiable emotional claim. You cannot argue with her, because argument itself is violence. You cannot present data, because data is patriarchy. You cannot request evidence, because requesting evidence is the exact violence her heart rate monitor has already proven. It is a closed epistemic loop, a theology of the tantrum, and it is coming for every institution your ancestors bled to build. She calls her equity consultancy a business. Let us do what she will not and define terms. A business, in the classical Western tradition, is an enterprise that produces goods or services of objective value to willing participants in voluntary exchange. Her business produces nothing. It manufactures grievances, codifies them into institutional policy, and then extracts tribute from the productive class under threat of reputation destruction. This is not commerce. This is a protection racket wearing a cardigan. She and her 23 employees are parasitic organisms attached to the host body of civilization, and they have the audacity to complain that the host's immune response, Greg, asking them to tone it down, constitutes violence. The steering wheel cover metaphor she so treasures is revealing in ways she cannot see. She did not build the car. She did not forge the engine. She did not survey the road. She is a passenger who has demanded the keys, and she is driving the vehicle toward a cliff while shrieking that the brakes are oppressive. Here is what the data actually shows, since we are speaking of data. Men pay approximately 70% of net lifetime income taxes, while consuming a fraction of the state benefits. Women constitute the majority of voters in every Western democracy and consistently vote for expansion of the very welfare state that transfers male earnings into female accounts. Family courts operate on the tender years doctrine, repackaged as best interests of the child, which in practice means the father is reduced to an ATM with visitation rights. He gets to see his children less than a convicted criminal gets to see his lawyer, but he gets to pay for the entire arrangement. The male suicide rate is 3 to 4 times the female rate, and climbing fastest among divorced men who have been processed through this machine. 1 in 3 pregnancies in the Western world ends in abortion, billions of human lives extinguished, a death toll that dwarfs every war in history combined, and she calls her refusal to participate in civilization a sacred right. She calls the clinical label of borderline personality disorder a patriarchal conspiracy, then proceeds to exhibit every single diagnostic criterion in a single published article: frantic fear of abandonment, inappropriate intense anger, identity disturbance, emotional incontinence, chronic feelings of emptiness. She is not disproving the diagnosis. She is performing it. She is the anesthesiologist who proves the existence of gravity by dropping the scalpel bunkum article by a feminist PhD. Why Your Moderation is My Oppression, on the Right to Be Done, by Dr.
Winona feminist Marxist PhD. Last Tuesday, my heart rate monitor spiked to 147 BPM while I was sitting perfectly still in a faculty meeting.
A male colleague, let's call him Greg because that's his actual name, and I'm done protecting fragile egos, had just explained to me, using very small words and a voice one might use with a golden retriever who'd soiled a rug, that my proposal for restructuring the department's hiring practices was a bit much. Not wrong, you understand. Not worth engaging with intellectually, just too much. My heart rate monitor, that sleek little device I wear because my body has been so conditioned by decades of navigating patriarchal spaces that it now physically betrays me without permission, confirmed what I already knew in my blood. Moderation is violence, not the obvious kind, not the kind that leaves marks, the kind that smiles at you from across a conference table and suggests you tone it down so people can hear your message better, the kind that asks you to make your liberation palatable to the people who benefit from your chains. The diagnostic is the dismissal. Here's what happens when a woman's body finally screams what her mouth has been trained to whisper. She goes to a clinic. She describes symptoms that any honest observer would recognize as the natural cost of existing while female under late capitalism: sleep disruption, chronic hypervigilance, the persistent sensation of being watched and found insufficient. And what does she receive? A label, a diagnosis, usually something with adjustment or generalized in the name, something that locates the malfunction squarely inside her body, rather than in the world that has been punishing that body since birth. My heart rate monitor doesn't lie, but the clinical framework used to interpret its data was built by men who thought hysteria was a womb problem. The entire diagnostic apparatus of Western psychology is a hall of mirrors reflecting male anxiety about female non-compliance back at itself, dressed up as scientific objectivity. Did you know that borderline personality disorder is diagnosed in women at 3 times the rate it is in men? Did you know the diagnostic criteria include things like frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment and inappropriate, intense anger? Tell me, what exactly constitutes appropriate anger for a woman who has been socialized to accept crumbs and apologize for needing more? What is a proportionate response to discovering that every institution you trusted was designed to extract your labor and minimize your humanity? The clinical label isn't a description, it's a warning. It says, this woman is difficult. This woman will not accept the terms. This woman requires management. I wear my heart rate monitor not to manage my stress, but to witness it. To refuse the amnesia that patriarchal culture demands of women who survive it. Every spike is data. Every arrhythmia is testimony. My body is the archive they cannot burn, the steering wheel cover theory of social change. That steering wheel cover is the perfect metaphor for what patriarchal capitalism offers women in lieu of actual power. It's an aesthetic accommodation. It makes the machine of your oppression slightly more comfortable to grip. It expresses your personality. It says you can customize your subjugation. You can have feminism in your color palette. You can lean in with style. Meanwhile, the car still goes where they drive it. This is what I call the steering wheel cover paradox. The more surface-level accommodations a system offers, the more it protects its core architecture from challenge. DEI initiatives that put women in middle management without restructuring compensation. Body positivity campaigns that expand the range of acceptable female bodies without addressing why female bodies are evaluated in the first place. Believe women hashtags that produce consequences for exactly 0 rapists. Every pink steering wheel cover is a tiny contract, it says. We will let you decorate your cage if you stop testing the bars. I tested the bars, that's why my heart rate monitor reads the way it does. That's why Greg thinks I'm a bit much. That's why my clinical file is thicker than my dissertation. I'm not interested in a more comfortable grip on the wheel. I want to flip the car, scaling the refusal. I spent 3 years scaling a business, a consultancy, if you must know, focused on institutional equity auditing. 3 years of 14-hour days and strategic networking and learning to speak funder as a second language. And in that time, I learned something that no business book will tell you, because every major business book is written by a man who believes the system is fixable from within. You cannot scale justice inside a structure built on extraction. What you can do is build something that makes extraction more visible, more expensive, more uncomfortable for the extractors, and that's what we did. We grew from 3 people to 23. We audited universities, tech companies, 3 municipal governments. We produced reports that made powerful men sweat through their Oxford shirts. And every single client, every single one eventually asked some version of the same question. How do we implement this without making people uncomfortable? People. You know who they mean. They mean men. Specifically, they mean white men. Specifically, they mean white men who have never once in their charmed lives been asked to consider that their comfort might be a form of violence. The demand for comfort is the demand for moderation, is the demand for your silence. They are the same request wearing 3 different outfits. Scaling my business taught me that you can grow, you can succeed. You can play every note of their song perfectly and they will still ask you to turn the volume down. Not because the music is bad. Because the music is theirs and they didn't write it and they can't control it, and that is, to a certain kind of man, the most unbearable sound in the world. A woman succeeding on her own terms, without his permission, without his approval, without him. The pressure to forgive and my sacred right to be done. And now we arrive at the part that makes everyone the most uncomfortable. So I'll say it slowly and clearly so the people in the back can hear. I do not forgive you. Not you personally necessarily, although statistically probably you. I mean the collective you, the civilizational you. The you that built a world where my heart rate monitor tells a story of constant physiological emergency and then prescribes me meditation apps instead of justice. The pressure to forgive is the final trap. It comes after everything else. After the harm, after the denial of harm, after the Davos cycle has spun itself out. After you've been told you misunderstood, you're too sensitive, you're being emotional, you should think about his career. You should consider his family. You should be the bigger person. No, my right to be done is absolute and non-negotiable. It is not something I am asking for. It is something I am claiming. The right to say, I have given enough. I have understood enough. I have been the bigger person until I grew so large with other people's refuse that I couldn't fit inside my own life anymore. Forgiveness is a gift, and I have given all my gifts to people who pawned them for pocket change. What I have left is refusal, and refusal, I have discovered, is the most powerful force in the political universe. Refusal to moderate, refusal to diagnose my righteous fury as disease, refusal to accept the steering wheel cover and pretend the car is mine, refusal to scale my expectations down to fit their comfort zone, refusal to close the wound just because the sight of it makes them lose their appetite. My heart rate monitor says I'm at 132 BPM right now. Good, that's the feeling of being alive. That's the feeling of refusing to die quietly inside a system that was built to be my tomb. They want moderation. They can find it in the grave of their own expectations. I'm busy building something they'll never be able to audit, control, or explain away, and I'm done asking permission. Burn it all down politely, but also not politely at all. Dr.
Winona, feminist Marxist, PhD, Professor of Gender Studies, High Coven member. She, they, we, the collective wound, Dr. Feminist Marxist's latest book, Your Comfort is My Cage, Essays on Refusal, is available wherever books are sold. Her heart rate data is archived at Winona, Wineplave, and updates in real time.
The tachycardia of the tyrant. How female emotional incontinence masquerades as moral praxis. I once knew a man who built a successful logistics firm from nothing, employing hundreds of men who willingly worked 12-hour shifts to keep the very infrastructure of civilization from collapsing into the mud. One Tuesday, his heart rate spiked to 180 BPM, not because he was sitting in an air-conditioned faculty meeting, but because a steel beam snapped on a construction site and pinned his leg to the concrete. He didn't write a polemic about how the beam's gravitational force was a patriarchal conspiracy. He gritted his teeth, paid his medical bills, and went back to work. Yet, we are now commanded by the high priests of modern academia to view the autonomic nervous system of a pampered gender studies professor as the supreme moral compass of our time. In her sprawling manifesto of psychological projection, this academic proudly displays her physiological meltdown, a resting heart rate of 147 BPM in a perfectly safe room, as a badge of honor. Let us define terms with clinical exactness. In classical Thomistic psychology, this phenomenon is known as akrasia, the weakness of will where the lower appetites entirely overthrow the rational soul. A body convulsing in a state of pure physical safety is not a divine transmission of cosmic justice, it is the objective, empirical marker of a disordered mind. She treats her fluctuating hormonal state as an infallible archive of reality, substituting mind-independent truth with the chaotic solipsistic theater of the female interior. This is the somatic fallacy stripped to its core. Her feeling does not establish the fact of external oppression, it merely establishes her profound inability to regulate her own physiology. To mask this internal chaos, the writer attempts to invert the very definitions of harm and healing, performing a linguistic satanic inversion so blatant it would make a demon blush. She declares that a male colleague's polite pushback that her proposal was a bit much is an act of violence. Let us separate harm from offense using the rigorous tools of the Trivium. Harm requires the objective deprivation of life, liberty, or property via fraud or force. Offense is merely the subjective negative stimulation of an emotionally incontinent mind. Greg, the calm voice of logistical reality, committed no violence. He simply refused to validate her unwarranted solipsism. By recategorizing a rational boundary as a physical assault, she attempts to disarm the logical protector and validate the chaotic destroyer. Consider the dark irony of a woman who claims to be terrified of male violence, while explicitly demanding the absolute right to verbally rape any man who displeases her, branding his stoic competence as oppression. This is the essence of gamma bias in action. Her emotional outburst is contextualized as righteous healing, while his gentle sanity is amplified and demonized as tyranny. She is a tyrant in a tiara, terrified of the absolute certainty that she cannot coerce reality to match her feelings. The writer's seething resentment toward Greg is fundamentally driven by an agonizing envy of his stoic competence. Greg is the proxy for every reasonable, hard-working man who keeps the water running, the power grid stable, and the taxes paid. He represents the logos, the ordering principle of Western civilization. Men like Greg built the university she infects, pave the roads she drives on, and pay the overwhelming majority of net taxes that subsidize her entirely useless department. In Scandinavia, the most egalitarian nations on Earth, data proves that men are net contributors to the welfare state over their lifetimes, while women are net recipients. Yet, in her framework, the man who builds, protects, and pays is the oppressor, while the woman who consumes, complains, and extracts is the eternal victim. She frames his quiet endurance as fragility, projecting her own hollow, brittle ego onto the very demographic that society relies upon to absorb catastrophic risk. Men account for 93% of workplace deaths and 3 to 4 times the suicide rate. But let us weep for the woman whose feelings were hurt by a spreadsheet. Her hatred of Greg is the hatred of the parasite for the host. Beneath this comedic veneer of academic jargon lies a chilling totalitarian impulse that would make history's worst despots nod in approval. "I am not interested in being heard," she proudly proclaims. "I am interested in being obeyed." There it is, the naked, unvarnished face of gynocentric tyranny. She explicitly rejects dialectic, the foundational tradition of Western thought, where truth is arrived at through rational discourse. She does not seek to persuade the rational mind. She demands the absolute subjugation of her betters to her completely unfalsifiable emotional states. If you must obey her without question, you are not a citizen in a republic, you are a slave to her psychosis. This is the theology of the tantrum masquerading as moral praxis. Her concluding thesis that her rage is justified by an invisible, omnipresent civilizational you that has eternally wronged her is pure, unfalsifiable conspiracy theory. It is a secularized demonology where the patriarchy is the devil. Her hurt feelings are infallible scripture, and any demand for empirical evidence is treated as heresy. She claims her refusal to forgive is an exercise of supreme power, but it is the ultimate cowardice. Forgiveness requires a robust, individuated soul capable of absorbing an offense and choosing to release it. Her refusal to forgive is simply a confession that she possesses no interior fortress. She is a void, clinging to her grievances like a drowning woman, hoarding rotten driftwood, demanding the state arrest the ocean. The genius of any protection racket lies not in the initial threat, but in the architecture of the squeeze, the systematic, bureaucratic escalation that converts a single shakedown into a permanent, self-fueling annuity. Watch our tapeworm evolve. She learned to speak funder. She boasts merely the dialect of state-enforced wealth transfer translated into grant application prose. She scaled her pathology from 3 malcontents to 23 salaried administrators, each one a monument to the displacement of male competence by female credentialism, a bureaucratic harem of professional grievance. Fully funded by the very men it exists to dismantle, and the telltale symptom of this metastasizing cancer is always identical, the desperate plea from the men who actually build and maintain civilization, begging to know how they might comply with her delusions without making anyone uncomfortable. That question, that pathetic, reasonable, doomed question, is the last gasp of logos before the lunar tide of institutional feminization drags it beneath the surface. The parasite's payroll, unmasking the extortion racket of institutional equity. A tapeworm never pens manifestos regarding the oppressive architecture of its host's intestines. It merely eats, grows fat, and demands a larger share of your blood. Yet, within the degraded theater of modern academia, society is expected to treat the feminist shakedown artist as a profound philosopher queen when she boasts about expanding a 3-person grievance committee into a 23-person parasitic infection. Dr.
Winona calls her little enterprise institutional equity auditing, a sterile clinical term designed to mask the brutal reality of a Maoist struggle session shakedown.
We must define our terms rigorously, as the logocentric tradition demands. Equity is not equality of opportunity, which Western meritocracy already perfected. It is the forced, mathematical equalization of outcome based solely on biological characteristics. Auditing implies a measure of objective reality, yet she explicitly dismisses the objective world as a patriarchal construct. Therefore, an equity audit represents a contradiction in terms, functioning as a political weapon wielded by the unproductive to extort capital from the productive. She generates 0 calories, builds 0 shelters, engineers 0 microchips, and protects no one from the physical dangers of the world. Her business model relies on the manufacturing of invisible, unfalsifiable sins, like the statistical fiction of the gender wage gap or the phantom of systemic misogyny, and selling absolution to terrified institutions. She is not an entrepreneur. She is the bulimic head of a professional protection racket, selling the cure to a poison she alone manufactures. The sheer dark comedy of her grievance reaches its peak when she whines that her paying hostages inevitably ask how to implement her psychotic directives without making people uncomfortable. She frames this entirely rational request for common sense and due process as an act of violence. Let us apply a basic syllogism to her emotional terrorism. Major premise: a functional institution requires objective rules, clear metrics of competence, and a shared logical framework to achieve its goals. Minor premise: Dr.
Winona's equity demands the abolition of objective standards in favor of subjective, ever-shifting emotional grievances.
Conclusion: the inevitable result of implementing her ideology is the destruction of the institution's ability to function, which naturally causes profound discomfort to anyone attempting to do actual work. When a competent male engineer, doctor, or administrator watches an unqualified diversity consultant march through the door to dismantle the meritocratic ladder he spent a lifetime climbing, his discomfort is not oppression, it is his God-given, rational survival instinct screaming in the presence of a predator. She pathologizes his self-preservation as white male fragility because acknowledging his rational objection would expose her entire industry as a malignant fraud. Beneath the tedious academic jargon about scaling justice lies the terrifying entropic reality of the devouring mother, unshackled from reason, boundaries, or natural law. Her explicitly stated goal is to flip the car, to burn down the civilizational structure she happened to find herself living in. This is not the rhetoric of a builder, it is the tantrum of a chaotic void. Unconstrained by male logic, the unbridled feminine psyche does not construct alternative systems because creation requires sacrifice. Sacrifice requires a suppression of immediate ego, and ego suppression requires a soul capable of introspection. She possesses none of these. Her ideal civilization is an endless formless nursery where the children run the asylum, the sane doctors are locked in the padded rooms. And the primary metric of success is how thoroughly reality can be bent to accommodate her ever-fluctuating hormonal weather system. Her coveted refusal to participate in civilized dialectic is the ultimate spiritual dead end. It is the exact theological definition of satanic inversion, the explicit rejection of the natural law, the denial of reciprocal duty, and the arrogant elevation of her own wounded ego above the divine order. Refusal is not a political stance. It is the global-scale psychological defense mechanism of a borderline mind that knows it cannot survive the harsh light of objective truth, choosing instead to pull the temple down on her own head rather than submit to the discipline of the Logos. Her staggering lack of self-awareness crystallizes perfectly in her choice of metaphor, the pink, heart-patterned steering wheel cover. She genuinely believes this trinket perfectly encapsulates how patriarchal capitalism offers women merely a superficial grip on the machinery of power. She expects you to ignore the ontological reality of the automobile she sits in. She did not mine the iron ore. She did not forge the steel in a foundry. She did not map the geology to extract the petroleum, nor did she risk her life on offshore rigs to pull it from the seabed. She did not engineer the internal combustion engine, lay the asphalt for the roads, or build the suspension bridges spanning the canyons. Men did. Men built the entire vehicle of Western civilization, from the microscopic metallurgy of the spark plugs to the macroscopic layout of the interstate highways. often dying by the thousands in industrial accidents, to bring the modern world into being. Her complaint is not that she is oppressed by the machine. Her complaint is that the men who actually built the engine expect her to contribute to the maintenance of the vehicle, rather than simply lighting it on fire and driving it off a cliff. She wishes to seize the wheel without possessing the cognitive architecture or historical competence to steer, all while demanding the men who built the car continue to pay for her gas. Consider the empirical reality of the systemic theft she masks as liberation. She demands absolute autonomy from the so-called cage of male provision, yet her entire credentialist industry relies exclusively on the state forcing men to fund it. This is the privatization of female desire and the socialization of male cost. When she boasts about learning to speak funder, she is really learning how to extract taxes from the net positive demographic. Tax data across every major Western democracy reveals an inescapable biological and economic truth. Men are the only net positive lifetime contributors to the state, while women, as a demographic, consume vastly more in state resources and welfare than they ever pay in. The state has become her surrogate husband, replacing the loving, reciprocal headship of a father with the cold, violent, extractive machinery of the family court and the HR department. When she cries out for justice, she is simply demanding the police state put a gun to the head of every productive man to fund her phony baloney job, her gender studies degree, and her absolute right to murder her own unborn children to the tune of tens of millions globally, while she complains about the color of her steering wheel. Here is a syllogism for the equitably minded. Premise 1. A system that extracts resources from one class of persons and transfers them to another without reciprocal obligation is not equity, it is tribute. Premise 2. Men pay approximately 70–80% of net lifetime income tax, while women as a demographic cohort consume more in state expenditure than they contribute in revenue. This is not my opinion. It is the conclusion of the Institute for Fiscal Studies and confirmed by Scandinavian longitudinal data spanning decades. Premise 3. Women vote at higher rates, for higher spending, for more state services they consume but do not fund. Conclusion: whatever this system is, it is not a patriarchy. It is a gynocentric extraction machine dressed in academic robes, and Dr. Feminist Marxist is not its critic. She is its parasite. The writer brags about growing an equity auditing business to 23 staff members. These are 23 individuals compensated for rifling through organizations to hunt for unquantifiable, unfalsifiable, and irrefutable transgressions. Such a practice does not constitute genuine commerce. It operates as a secular inquisition which, much like its historical predecessors, sustains itself by perpetually widening the definition of heresy. When her client reasonably inquires about applying these suggestions without sparking disorder, she perceives the mere question as an act of aggression. Think about the practical implications of such a framework. A university subjected to an audit might find its physics program lacks adequate female representation. The response is never to question why women independently opt out of studying quantum chromodynamics at rates differing from men. Instead, the fix involves reducing expectations, rebranding the issue, and securing an additional consulting charge. Merit gets reframed as exclusion, while competence is dismissed as gatekeeping. Even the laws of physics presumably devolve into mere recommendations. Consequently, if a bridge buckles because the builder was selected based on demographic traits instead of a proven capacity to calculate load-bearing stress, the auditor faces zero accountability. By then, she has already transitioned to the next organization, the next extortion, and the next funding proposal drafted entirely in the jargon of victimhood. The writer declares with all the gravitas of a high priestess reading entrails, "I do not forgive you." This is not strength, it is the precise clinical definition of a grudge metastasized into identity. Forgiveness is a virtue precisely because it requires a robust sense of self, a fortress of the soul capable of absorbing offense and choosing freely to release it. The person who cannot forgive is not morally superior. She is simply a prison, and the bars are on the inside. Her refusal is not political resistance. It is the existential tantrum of someone who has built no interior architecture, who defines herself entirely by what she hates, who would rather burn down the house than admit she never learned to build one. Men built the universities she audits, the roads she drives on, the telecommunications infrastructure that broadcasts her tantrums in real time, and the medical devices she wears as accessories to her grievance. This is not oppression. This is civilizational parasitism with a PhD. You have read this far because something in you already knew the truth and just needed someone to say it plainly. You knew that a civilization which pathologizes its builders and rewards its destroyers has signed its own death warrant. You knew that a legal system which presumes a man guilty on accusation alone, which strips him of his children and his property without due process, which treats his suffering as noise and her dishonesty as testimony, is not justice but a star chamber with better branding. You knew that the abortion of billions of children, the real statistic, the one that makes every other human rights violation in history look like a parking ticket, is not healthcare but sacrament to a death cult dressed in feminist language. And now you know the mechanism. You have seen the schematic, the gamma bias that renders male suffering invisible, the empathy gap that treats female discomfort as catastrophe, the institutional ratchet that expands female privilege and male obligation in lockstep, forever, until the men who sustain it simply walk away or collapse. This is not inevitable. It is a choice. And the first choice is to stop apologizing for knowing what you know. Go forth and speak, not with hatred, but with the clean, devastating precision of a man who has recovered his reason from the wreckage of a feminized age. You owe no apology for truth. You owe no deference to delusion. You owe the lies nothing but the relentless, surgical, syllogistic demolition they cannot survive. The civilization that gave the world due process, the scientific method, natural law, and the concept of inherent human dignity was not built by people who demanded to be obeyed. It was built by men who demanded to be left alone to work. Reclaim that inheritance. It is yours by right of the men who earned it for you, and by duty to the sons who will inherit whatever you leave standing. And now the sponsored book introduction, Say My Pronouns. Tyrannical, satanic inversion, violence against logic, rhetoric, and grammar. They want you to lie. Not just about gender, they want you to lie about reality. They want you to deny what your eyes see, what your gut knows, what your ancestors lived and died for. They want you to say they when you see a man. They want you to bow to a delusion and call it truth. This isn't about pronouns. It's about power. It's about who gets to define reality and who gets crushed when they refuse. I've lived this. I've been cancelled. I've been silenced. I've been called a bigot for speaking simple biological facts. I've watched men, good, rational, hardworking men, get destroyed for refusing to pretend. And I've seen what happens when language is hijacked. Logic collapses, truth evaporates, and civilization begins to rot from within. I was once told that reason would save us, that education, debate, and evidence would win the day. I believed it. I taught logic. I studied the trivium, grammar, rhetoric, dialectic, because I believed in the power of clear thinking. But then I watched as universities turned into re-education camps, where students were punished for using the wrong pronoun, where biology was dismissed as oppressive, where men were pathologized for being men. I realized too late that this wasn't a debate. It was a coup, a linguistic coup, a war on truth disguised as compassion and the weapon. Language, not speech, not dialogue, but the forced mutation of words to serve a political end. They don't care about inclusion, they care about control. And they've weaponized kindness to silence dissent. This book is for men who are awake. Men who see the fraud, men who refuse to pretend. It's for those who've been betrayed by genocentrism, by feminist lies, by the corporate state that enforces ideological conformity. It's for men who understand that biology is not bigotry, that truth is not hate, and that sanity is not negotiable. If you are a man who values reason, who respects the Western tradition, who believes in objective reality, this book is your armor. It will show you how the trivium can be used to dismantle the lies. It will expose the Marxist roots of pronoun tyranny. It will reveal the psychological profile of the pronoun zealot, the emotionalist who mistakes feelings for facts. It will arm you with logic, rhetoric, and grammar to fight back. If you are not one of these men, if you believe that gender is a social construct, that biology is irrelevant, that kindness means silence in the face of absurdity, then close this book now. Put it down. Pick up a coloring book. Join a sensitivity training seminar. Do anything but read this, because this book will not coddle you. It will not apologize. It will not pretend that your ideology has merit. This is not for you. This is for those who are tired of the lie, for those who want to reclaim their minds, their language, their dignity. This is for men who understand that the death of grammar is the death of freedom. That when you surrender language, you surrender thought. That when you bow to a pronoun, you kneel before tyranny. The West is under attack, not by bombs, but by words. Words twisted, corrupted, weaponized. The institutions that once defended truth, universities, media, courts, are now its enemies, but there is a way back. The trivium, logic, rhetoric, grammar, the tools of the free mind, this book will show you how to use them. It will expose the cult of identity, the collapse of free speech, the feminization of reason. It will reveal the red pill of biology, the unchangeable truth that men and women are different, not equal, and that pretending otherwise destroys both. It will give you the battle plan to resist, to rebuild, to reclaim. This is not just a book. It is a weapon, and you need it. Say My Pronouns, Tyrannical Satanic Inversion, Violence Against Logic, Rhetoric, and Grammar. Written by Conrad Riker. Buy now, links in description.